What if the artery running along your temple right now already started changing the moment you put down that last sugary drink? Hours before any of it shows up on a scale, a mirror, or a blood pressure cuff. This video walks through what actually happens inside your blood vessels across 30 days without added sugar, in the order it actually happens. The fast chemistry first, then the slower signals, then the structural question nobody likes to hear the honest answer to. No shortcuts, no dramatic before and after, just what the research actually measured. Most people picture a blood vessel as a pipe. Sugar either clogs it or it doesn't. It turns out that picture is wrong in a useful way. The inner lining of every vessel in the body, the endothelium, is a single layer of living cells that behaves less like plumbing and more like an organ in its own right, spread across a surface area vast enough that, unrolled flat, it would cover a stretch of ground far larger than the vessels themselves. It is not there simply to hold blood in. It is constantly sensing, signaling, and adjusting. Doing its job for this tissue means several distinct things happening at once, and none of them show up on a routine checkup. It means producing nitric oxide on demand so vessels widen when tissue downstream needs more blood. It means controlling how easily platelets clump together at the wrong moment. It means deciding what leaks out of the bloodstream into surrounding tissue and what stays contained. It means talking, chemically, to circulating immune cells about whether there is a problem worth responding to. So when the title of this video asks what happens to your blood vessels, it is really asking about several separate systems that can move independently on different timelines for different reasons. Over the next several minutes, this becomes concrete. Real markers, real numbers, real windows of time. Some of them shift within days. Others barely move within a month at all, and by the end, you will know exactly which is which. Every tissue in the body replaces its own building blocks at a different pace, and blood vessels are a striking example of just how uneven that pace can be. Collagen, one of the two main structural proteins in a vessel wall, has a half-life researchers place at around 60 to 70 days, meaning a meaningful fraction of it turns over and gets rebuilt in roughly that stretch. Elastin, the other major structural protein, behaves almost like a museum piece by comparison, with a half-life estimated near 50 years. Most of what is in your arteries today was laid down before adulthood and will still be there decades from now. The single-cell lining itself, the endothelium, replaces only a tiny sliver of its own cells each day under normal conditions. 30 days sits in a strange, useful position given those numbers. It is nowhere near long enough to meaningfully rebuild collagen and nowhere close to touching elastin at all. But it is plenty of time for the chemistry moving through the bloodstream, the actual composition of what those vessels are bathed in hour to hour, to shift substantially. This gap between fast chemistry and slow structure is exactly why researchers designing studies on sugar and cardiovascular markers tend to land on windows in a similar range. Aberle and colleagues use 3 to 4 week crossover periods to catch lipid shifts in healthy young men. A 12-week trial in Latino adolescents captured changes in triglycerides and inflammatory markers, and a much longer 18-month analysis from the Premier trial was needed before blood pressure differences became statistically reliable. This pattern becomes the roadmap for the rest of this video. What follows moves in the same order those timelines suggest. The fastest moving blood chemistry first, then the slower inflammatory and microbial signals, and only at the end, the honest question of what, if anything, 30 days can do to the physical structure of the vessel wall itself. Of everything covered in this video, blood fats respond the fastest, and the direction of that response has been studied from both sides. In a 2-week controlled feeding study, Stanhope and colleagues had healthy adults consume beverages sweetened with high fructose corn syrup at increasing proportions of their daily calories, and found a clear dose-dependent rise in after-meal triglycerides, fasting LDL cholesterol, and uric acid as the sugar dose went up. Aberle and colleagues found something similar working in the other direction of dose. 9 healthy young men given even moderate daily amounts of fructose or sucrose in beverages for 3 weeks showed significantly higher LDL and total cholesterol compared with an equivalent amount of glucose. The reason triglycerides move first has to do with which organ processes the sugar before it ever reaches the vessel wall. Fructose in particular is metabolized almost entirely by the liver, and once liver stores of a related sugar are filled, the liver begins converting the excess into fat through a pathway called de novo lipogenesis, some of which enters the bloodstream as triglycerides. That happens on the timescale of a single day's eating pattern, which is why researchers can catch after-meal triglyceride changes within the earliest days of a dietary shift, well before fasting numbers fully settle into a new baseline. A more real-world version of this pattern showed up in a 12-week trial of Latino adolescents with obesity. Even a modest drop in free sugar intake, the larger reduction seen in the intervention arm, brought sugar down from roughly 11.5% of daily calories to about 7%. Not the complete elimination this video's title describes, correlated in an exploratory analysis pooling both study arms with a measurable improvement in triglyceride levels. This detail matters going forward. It means the changes this section describes are not exclusively available to someone who reaches zero added sugar. They begin showing up well before that point, on a dose-response curve rather than an all-or-nothing switch. Blood pressure is where this video has to be honest about a gap in the evidence rather than smoothing over it. The most cited data connecting sugar-sweetened beverages to blood pressure comes from Chen and colleagues, analyzing the Premier trial. Reducing intake by 1 12-ounce serving per day was associated with about a 1.8 millimeter of mercury drop in systolic pressure and a 1.1 millimeter of mercury drop in diastolic pressure. That is a real statistically meaningful effect. It was also measured across 18 months, not 30 days. There are plausible biological reasons blood pressure could move faster than that timeline suggests. Fructose metabolism generates uric acid as a byproduct, and uric acid has been linked in other research to reduce nitric oxide availability and to changes in how the kidneys handle sodium, both of which are mechanisms that could theoretically act within weeks rather than months. But a mechanism being biologically plausible on a fast timescale is different from a trial actually having measured it that fast. And the honest answer is that most short-duration studies on added sugar and vascular markers are not designed or powered to catch blood pressure changes reliably in a 1-month window. This gap is not accidental. Blood pressure is a noisy measurement shaped by sodium intake, stress, sleep, and measurement conditions on any given day, which means small dietary effects tend to get buried in that noise unless a study runs long enough with enough participants to average it out. So going into the rest of this video, it is worth holding 2 things at once. The direction of the evidence on sugar and blood pressure is consistent, but the specific claim of a 30-day change is one this video will not overstate. Blood vessels do not only respond to what arrives from the liver, they also respond to compounds manufactured by the trillions of bacteria living in the gut, and one of the most studied is trimethylamine N-oxide, usually shortened to TMAO. Produced when gut bacteria break down certain dietary compounds before the liver converts them further. Elevated TMAO has been linked, observationally, to cardiovascular disease risk in humans, which raised an obvious question. Does raising TMAO actually impair how vessels function, and how quickly? A recent controlled study addressed exactly that, dosing healthy adults with a TMAO precursor and measuring flow-mediated dilation, a standard test of how well an artery widens in response to increased blood flow along with arterial stiffness, both after a single dose and, again, after 4 weeks of daily dosing. The result was mostly a non-event, no significant change in stiffness or blood pressure, and only a transient sex-specific signal in men that did not persist. It is a useful reminder that a compound being linked to disease, risk, and population data does not automatically mean it produces a fast, measurable effect on vessel function in a healthy person over a few weeks. A parallel line of evidence comes from animal research, and it needs to be labeled clearly as such. Mice fed a Western-style, high-fat, high-sugar diet for 7 months developed gut bacterial imbalance alongside measurably increased arterial stiffness and reduced dilation capacity, and treating those mice with antibiotics to suppress the gut bacteria substantially reversed both. That result cannot be assumed to translate to a 30-day human timeline, both because mice are not small humans and because 7 months in a mouse's lifespan represents a much larger fraction of its life than 30 days represents of a human's. What it does establish is that a gut-to-artery pathway exists and matters, running on a genuinely different clock than the liver-driven triglyceride changes covered earlier. If you've made it this far, drop a comment. Which of these 3 surprised you more? How fast triglycerides move, how uncertain the blood pressure timeline actually is, or the fact that gut bacteria have a say in any of this? The second half covers inflammation, whole fruit versus added sugar, sleep, and the honest answer on what 30 days can and cannot change structurally. Inflammation gets used as a scary word, but the markers behind it move on their own separate clock. C-reactive protein, interleukin-6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha are the 3 most commonly tracked. In the 12-week Latino adolescent trial mentioned earlier, a modest cut in added sugar correlated with a measurable improvement specifically in tumor necrosis factor alpha, an exploratory but statistically significant finding. A related trial by the same research group, published a couple of years earlier, reached a similar conclusion from the opposite direction, reporting that even moderate sugar-sweetened beverage intake measurably promoted inflammatory signaling. Why does this move slower than triglycerides? Lipids are a direct output of liver metabolism, shifting almost as fast as the liver processes a meal. Inflammatory markers instead reflect an accumulating immune response, built from repeated exposures rather than a single metabolic event. The mouse study on gut bacteria and Western-style diets, referenced earlier, showed this compounding effect directly. Elevated interleukin-6 and a related endotoxin marker built up over months of sustained diet, not days. That timing matters for expectations. 12 weeks produced a detectable inflammatory shift in human data. Nothing published points to a reliable 30-day inflammatory signal specifically. It is plausible that something is moving beneath the surface by day 30, given the mechanism, but the evidence to confirm it at that exact mark simply is not there yet. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the mechanisms researchers link to gradual arterial stiffening over years, which becomes relevant again toward the end of this video. Gram for gram of sugar, an apple, and a soft drink are not chemically identical experiences for the body because of what surrounds that sugar. Fiber, water content, and polyphenols form what researchers call the fruit matrix. And a symposium report in the Journal of Nutritional Science described that matrix, particularly its polyphenols, as meaningfully altering how the body processes the same sugar molecules. Interestingly, one controlled trial by Crummett and Grosso even found blended fruit produced a lower glucose spike than eating the same fruit whole, showing the matrix effect is more nuanced than a simple whole versus processed rule. Mechanistically, fiber slows gastric emptying, which blunts how quickly sugar reaches the bloodstream and how sharply insulin has to respond. Certain polyphenols, hesperidin from citrus being the most studied, have shown benefits for vascular function and blood pressure in some randomized trials, specifically involving whole citrus or its juice. A sugar-sweetened beverage arrives without any of that scaffolding, delivering isolated fructose and glucose directly and rapidly to the liver. This distinction should not be overstated into a blanket claim. The same symposium noted that other trials on fruit juice found neutral cardiometabolic effects, and individual variability in polyphenol absorption is large. What the evidence actually supports is narrower and more honest. The matrix surrounding a sugar molecule changes the physiological conversation the body has with it, not a guaranteed protective verdict. Blood pressure is supposed to drop at night, a pattern researchers call nocturnal dipping, and it is considered one marker of a well-functioning cardiovascular system. A 2026 narrative review by Yang, Ma, and Yan laid out a useful distinction. Acute single-night sleep loss and chronic sustained sleep restriction do not appear to affect vessels the same way. One controlled trial in healthy young women found that a single night of partial sleep restriction produced no significant change in flow-mediated dilation at all, suggesting the vessel lining tolerates an occasional short night reasonably well. Reviews of chronic sleep restriction, lasting beyond about a week, tell a different story, describing measurable endothelial impairment and sustained blood pressure elevation. A separate study using nighttime aircraft noise as a sleep quality disruptor, rather than a duration cut, found reduced dilation and higher systolic pressure in people already at elevated cardiac risk, suggesting continuity of sleep may matter as much as total hours. Diet plausibly connects to this picture indirectly. Blood glucose fluctuations and the timing of meals relative to bedtime can influence sleep architecture and nighttime autonomic activity, which gives sugar intake a secondary, less direct route into next-day vascular readings, layered on top of the mechanisms already covered. All of this, though, comes with an important caveat about who exactly was studied. Worth naming plainly, several of the strongest studies already covered were conducted in narrow populations. Eberle's cohort was 9 healthy young men. That is not a flaw unique to this research, but it means applying these findings evenly across every viewer requires some caution, because vascular aging itself does not run on one timeline. Research on vascular aging describes women's arteries as comparatively protected relative to men's, up until menopause, after which aging accelerates to match the male trajectory. A related review in Frontiers ties this acceleration to the loss of estrogen's inhibitory effect on collagen production by vascular smooth muscle cells, noting that in animal studies, this postmenopausal shift coincides with faster collagen deposition and buildup of advanced glycation end products, cross-linking arterial proteins. A structural change layered on top of everything metabolic covered so far. Age generally moves pulse wave velocity, the standard measure of arterial stiffness, upward regardless of sex, and it does so gradually across decades rather than months. Against that backdrop, a 30-day dietary change is not landing on a blank canvas. Someone starting further along that stiffening curve, or in the years surrounding menopause, may register a different size signal than a young, otherwise healthy adult tested in a 3-week crossover trial. Here is the actual answer, assembled from every marker covered. Blood lipids move first and fastest. Triglycerides and LDL cholesterol shift within days to a few weeks, visible in both directions across the Stanhope, Eberle, and Latino adolescent data. Inflammatory markers follow at a slower pace, with human data confirming change closer to the 12-week mark. Gut-derived compounds like TMAO, at least in the one controlled human dosing study available, did not shift meaningfully within 4 weeks in healthy people, suggesting that pathway may need more time or a different starting population to register. Blood pressure needs the longest runway among the functional markers, with the clearest human evidence spanning 18 months, not 30 days. And the structural question, arterial stiffness measured by pulse wave velocity, rests on collagen and elastin content that turn over across months and decades respectively, not weeks, which means the physical wall of the vessel is not expected to measurably change shape in this window, even as its internal environment shifts substantially. This is where the loop from the very first subtitle closes. Doing its job was never one single thing, and 30 days answers that question differently, depending which job is being asked about. Very likely, yes, for the chemistry bathing the vessel, not yet for the wall itself. That is the literal, unembellished answer this video set out to find. If this video helped you understand what actually changes and what doesn't yet in 30 days, leave a like, subscribe for more videos on vascular and metabolic health, and share it with someone who's had the same question.